Okay, I think everyone should be able to hear me. Let's get started. Happy Book Club month number 4. This month we read The Hour of the Star, a, a vexing book, a difficult book, and also at times brilliant and fantastic. And yeah, able to reach the highest highs in fiction for me. Um, I'd like to start the book club today with a comment from a girl in dungarees who is not able to be here, but she's been to the past 4 book clubs or so. And she left a comment on one of my posts, essentially saying that after 5 pages of the reading experience with this narrator, she decided that she was not going to join the book club this month and that she couldn't stand to read this book and deal with the tedium of this narrator and the interjections and the I wouldn't even call it the interjections, like, the first 30 30 or so pages of this book, um, I'm approximating, are essentially preamble and about the kind of affliction of storytelling. Um, and I I agree with that sentiment. This is a book that I probably would have given up on. Maybe not. I don't know if I would have given up on it. I'm glad that we read it for the book club because, as TJ just commented, um, like TJ struggled with the narrator at first, but was glad that they pushed through and kept reading. I am also glad that I pushed through and kept reading. I struggled deeply with the narrator, and I was having arguments with this narrator and with their approach and with all of the preamble and interjections and I'm going to say this phrase a lot today, but there was this philosophical apprehension to narrate, to tell a story, and that's nothing new. That's something that writers for centuries have been um, elucidating, expressing, and to have so many pages of that was just brutal. And I'm down with tedium. I love tedium. I am 690 pages through Anna Karenina, a book that has a huge amount of tedium. Um, I I'm down with tedium, but that afflicted sense of having to tell a story but can't find the right ethical, philosophical ground from which to tell it, to tell the truth, to tell it in reality. Um, that kind of inner battle is nothing to me that was compelling or different or exciting. I'll get more into that later. Um, and also, in these first 30 or so pages, what you could see beyond like the poeticism of the language, which, you know, uh, some people are going to like, some people aren't going to like. You could tell there were some insights that were very rich. There were these seeds of insights that were very rich. And that was probably the the primary thing that kept me reading was, okay, this is a person, a narrator capable of exceptional thinking, like really good aphoristic thinking. And so, that is what pulled me through. There would be a phrase or a way of putting an idea that was kind of, so it would always surprising and always very effective. I want to get to the part of this book that I thought was some of the best fiction that I've definitely read in the past, I don't know, few months, and probably that I've read in the past few years. Some of the, let's just call it what it is, the 15 or so pages that Olympico comes into the book from page 50 to 65 when it's in more or less scene with Olympico and our protagonist Macabea is some of the best writing, some of the funniest, some of the most like philosophically interesting, and also like the insights that Olympico and Macabea have when they're with each other are so banal and kind of stupid, but also brilliant and revealing and like give such depth that those 15 pages of the book, when it's primarily seen for the first time, you can tell that Lispector was like, oh shit, I'm onto something. You can tell that the rhythm of the story was so rich that we didn't need the, false kind of narrators trembling at the idea of telling a story, because the story was telling itself so well that I feel like Lispector was like, gas pedal down, this shit is really good. And then I found that after those 15 or so pages that were primarily seen, all the narrators' interjections were much more palatable to me. I trusted this book to tell a story. And I do want to say that I don't have this like need to be told a story. I love ideas. I love books that are primarily ideas. I don't need, capital N narrative to sustain me. But tedium for the sake of this affliction with story is just it makes me like sick basically. So it's a funny read for me because part of it I was like deeply artistically opposed to and thought there was very little in that was worthwhile, and the other, I would say, the first 50 pages, I felt that way. And then the last 35 pages, especially, 15 of those were soaring to basically the highest highs of what I like and appreciate and see in art. Livia said, yes, he is a hard one, but a necessity of Lispector to get to the actual story. That's interesting. I've been thinking about that too. It's funny, I've been like thinking about this book a lot and going back and forth about from like being very angry at this book and then also trying to imagine it told in any other way. Part of me doesn't feel like that's true, that it's a necessity of, Clarice Lispector to get to the actual story. Part of me feels like it's not true. And then part of me feels like it is true. Like that, for some reason, this is the only way, is to go through 50 pages of preamble and tedium to get to Maccabeah in the flesh, you know, in scene, in narrative reality. But I'll just share a personal anecdote. I was taking notes after I finished the book, and yeah, okay, let me just let me just read my notes. Um, I wrote the philosophical apprehension towards narrating and storytelling that the narrator unceasingly fills the book with is the biggest hurdle to the excellent parts of the book. This apprehension isn't anything new or outstanding, and it is something that almost every writer with depth and consideration and care experiences. This way of wrestling with it does nothing but give the reader the same headaches. It's stultifying and sucks out the possibilities. The question in regards to that apprehension is always, and what will you do with it? And then here's the personal anecdote that it reminds me of. Um, I'll just let it rip. In the first months of me kind of like deciding that I was going to become a writer and write full time and take it seriously, this was many years ago. I had took a writing class and had a teacher basically say, we had, I don't know, X many assignments to turn in. And the teacher said, he was this very dramatic and kind of downtrodden writing teacher. And he said, basically, if you don't know what to write for one of these assignments, then like write about not knowing what to write. And something about that kind of struck me as being pretty cheap and like insufficient, you know? But lo and behold, a few months later, I don't know, maybe weeks later, 6 weeks later, there was some, story that he wanted us to write that I just could not or did not give myself enough time for. I tried many different things, didn't work. And then I remember sitting or lying down actually in this living room upstairs of this place that I was living at, and I was like, fuck it, if I have to just write about not being able to write, that's what I'm gonna do. And I, fired off this piece and finished it, turned it in, didn't associate anything with it other than something that I finished and turned in. And then weeks later, when I got the story back with his comments on it, I will never forget that, that he wrote, "You've found your voice." And I looked at that and I was like, well, no, I haven't. That's ridiculous. No, I haven't found my voice. I was just fucking, I didn't do anything in this piece other than meddle, deliberate. There was nothing to it. And those two things struck me as like, they just hit the wrong chord in me. And it was like that writing about not knowing what to write, and then me writing that, this professor or teacher saying that I had like done something significant. He was just being nice, but they both struck me as like utterly wrong and untrue. I'm not saying that's what Lispector was doing in this book at all. It's not that Lispector didn't know what to write, but the association of reading this book and all of that apprehension that I was talking about, that narrative apprehension that exists in a lot of books, in many different ways, is associated in some way with that feeling of like insufficient. Like, and it doesn't mean that like Olympico and Macabea's part of this book had to be the entirety of the book, or that it had to start in some traditional way or be told in some traditional way. But I don't know. I think part of it also too is that like the existentialist kind of gesture that this book at times, there was like this deep spirituality in this book, and then also this immense void in it as well. And some of the like formally existentialist things in the book are also just like they don't do it for me. Okay, that's all being said, I'd really like to talk about, more about why this book is excellent, why it was worth reading, and get more of, I want other people's opinions too. I like to read a book and to have a strong feeling about it, a take, positive or negative or in between, or, angry or fitful or excited, or, if I'm reading a book and not much happens to me, not much reaction comes, then either the book is, well, no, that's essentially a sign that the book is ineffective and unsuccessful because it didn't do anything to me. This isn't a book that was written for people to like. It was a book essentially written for, an audience of one. I think this was a book that Lispector had to write. And I think, uh, but I have some quotes and snippets pulled from the book that I want to go over, some parts that I liked, and maybe parts that illustrated things about the book that were difficult for me. But I will say that, like, please don't agree with me on this. I want to hear about your experience of reading the book. Actually, when I was reading this and having arguments with why the book was doing what it was doing, I really wanted to get the perspective of readers who were maybe not enjoying it, but who like understood and believed and agreed with this approach of this highly involved narrator, this start and stop narration, this long preamble, and this what the narrator primarily was struggling with was not necessarily the character. This narrator was Macabea in many ways. They expressed this like transfiguration, this love that connected, like, this narrator became Macabea, loved Macabea, and so it wasn't necessarily the character herself that was impossible, but my reading was the difficulty that the narrator was having in telling the story was in storytelling itself. This is also a character that I feel like, I don't feel like, I have this nice little snippet that just describes their place in the world, in society, as this legacy of misfortune, this like less than less. The narrator describes Macabea's self-awareness as that of a dog, like someone who, for the first 60 or so pages, has no awareness of herself, but also has this. Macabea is a brilliant, and in her conception is a brilliant, precise, one of the most like interesting and compelling characters in fiction that I've ever read. Olympico as her foil is probably my favorite character that I've read, maybe since, well, maybe of all time. I loved Olympico and his machismo and insanity and brutality and his danger, and his kind of conditioned evil, and his boyishness. I just, I think both of these characters are rendered. Their characters, like the narrator says, that you like pass on the street and don't acknowledge, and no one sees, no one takes the time to see, and they're characters that have these these plights that could be like cliche, but they're rendered and created in ways that are so real that they're beyond real. It's just, I think that's a little bit why I have this difficulty with this fucking narrator and their like, you know, vapors at storytelling, because it's like, my God, these people that you have here that you've created are excellent. And I'm not talking about storytelling as in, narrative tension and plot. I'm talking about like, if the character needs to think on the page, let them think. If the narrator needs to paint them in a way that reveals something, like an idea or some philosophical concept, like let's let it rip. Those are some of my, the story elements of this book are very, I think, broad stroke obvious because of this apprehension with storytelling. It's like, well, let's make it very clear the techniques that are being used, but the characters themselves are as subtle and brilliant as possible. Anyway, I lost track, but I want to hear from people who one, really liked this book, who didn't have the disagreements I had with the way the story, with the way the book was written, with the way it was told, who didn't feel tedium. I guess the people who got something out of this. I'm going to say the phrase again. I'll probably bury this phrase forever after this, but the philosophical apprehension that the narrator had with storytelling. People who got something out of that and thought it enriched the story for them, the book for them, or just they got a lot out of it. For me, I was reading those parts like, Jesus Lord, please, something else. But I don't think that that's everyone's experience at all. So I want to hear from those people. I want to hear from the people that disagree with me. And then maybe after we have more of a discussion about that, I want to move into like what I think was excellent about this book, which is Macabea, Olympico, was it Gloria, and the real meat of these characters and this story. Also, just have to say, there are some parts of this book that were the funniest things that I've read in a very, very long time. Like, I don't know if I've been like so joyed, or overjoyed by like a funny part in a book since reading like parts of Taipei by Tao Lin. And, pound for pound, this book is probably funnier than that. And also, I have to say there's like a deep spirituality and a deep philosophy in this book that I think is beyond existentialism, beyond the kind of like literary blase of um, the 60s and 70s, and that's exceptional. So let me look at the comments again because I'm kind of rambling, but Mal, I think it's a sort of way to bridge the personal inner monologue of journaling and the process of writing a narrative. The personal inner monologue of journaling and the process of writing a narrative. Okay. Livia, I wish I knew more of her writing process, but I know she began writing after imagining the end and when she was at the street waiting for a cab and went from there. Livia, and that unawareness is Clarice's way to represent very bluntly the ignorant and innocent Brazilian people of that time and people still very present today. It's the only book she talks about this. Mal, yeah, I actually quite like the early narrator part. I think maybe because I didn't entirely take the narrator seriously. Nixie, the first few pages made me doubt whether I understand English at all. But when I got used to Lispector's writing style, the book felt like an out-of-body experience. Mal, I mean, I think there was a lot that was profound, but I think also he was sort of created to be melodramatic and over the top in his emotional turmoil in a way that was compelling and entertaining to me. Bingo. That is a great take, Mal. I really appreciate that. That makes me reconsider my whole take on this narrator. If you're reading, I forget what his name is. It's like LM. I can't remember. Whatever she named him. If you take this narrator as a joke, like all of his over the top emotional turmoil at storytelling, if you take that as a joke in itself, then that's a very, very interesting way. And maybe that's exactly what Lispector was doing, or maybe that's just a way to read it to see uh, it. I don't know. I just really appreciate that way of reading this narrator where I was like, oh my God, you can't be so pained by this way of, by storytelling itself. Like, I get it. We all do. That was my reaction. And like, sort of like, yeah, I just took him quite seriously, quite literally. But if you took it as this sort of like gesture that Lispector was doing to sort of like, because the thing is, like, this apprehension that the narrator feels and belabors over and over and over again is real. Like, it's something to the story. Like, anyone who has conscience and is thinking about storytelling and is feelingly doing so is going to have the same apprehensions. You're trying to render something from your experience or your imagination or from reality, and it just in 2 dimension on the page is always perspectival. It's always subjective, and that sort of disconnect, as true and as real as you can possibly render something, is always going to be subjective, is always going to be a little bit untrue. It's always going to have this ethical problem with it. That's real. That's a real experience. But, I think the way that Mal is reading this is really uh, potentially a key to getting past it. I'm taking, not to take it literally, but as this like sort of ironic gesture that Lispector's making. Now, whether or not you enjoy that uh, is up to you, and what's just going to hit for you. But I really appreciate that way of reading this narrator. I think it's a potentially a really successful, smart way to read the narrator in an enjoyable way, to get, not to get through it, but like to get something from it. So Mal, the bridging comment was about writing, about not being able to write. Oh, so what was that? Bridging. The personal inner monologue of journaling and the process of writing a narrative. Oh, yeah. Jambingo, I found him really annoying and hilarious. His turmoil for storytelling I related to. I like the clarity he finds by pinning down an outside identity and incorporating her into himself. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't find him hilarious. I found elements of the story hilarious. Um, yeah, fuck, man. I was just like exasperated by him. Um, but I could see through like a different perspective, a different way of reading, how it would be really funny. And I know how funny other parts of this book were. Um, so it makes me want to like reread it with Mal's and Jambingo's perspective. TJ Rodrigo was his name, I believe. Mal, I think I took him as a joke who sort of stumbles into being profound. Yeah, that's a perfect way to read it. Because remember, I was saying like the only thing that kept me going with this book, that I felt like a promise was delivered on in the first 30 to 50 pages, were these kind of stumbling into profundity, like this sort of like, oh shit, we found a truth here, or an aphorism uh, uh, that frames the truth in a really um, insightful, delectable way, Mal, and maybe I got that impression from him. The Tolbin introduction in the copy I have left. Let me look back at it. And this is a quote from Tolbin. He is capable of awkward asides, overconfidence in his own method, pure fear in the face of power and powerlessness of words, and then sudden passage of soaring beauty, that stark definition. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I don't think my edition, uh, uh, first of all, just a process of mine. I never read introductions until I read the whole book. I don't, that's just a process I have. Mine had an afterwards that did not mention the narrator at all. And I was like, yeah, because the narrator fucking sucked. But obviously Mal's edition had a writer and a thinker who could process what the narrator was doing in a way that made sense. And that way of putting it is spot on, brilliant. He is capable of awkward asides, overconfidence in his own method, pure fear in the face of power and powerlessness of words, and then sudden passages of soaring beauty and stark definition. Mal, but yeah, of course, that means he's still sort of fundamentally annoying character. Yeah. Jambingo, just when my thoughts go to stop talking, I think it's really funny to think that while reading. Livia, Rodrigo really vexed me, but at the same time, I enjoyed what he wanted to deliver, the little subtle poetry. That's awesome. The poetic parts of this book, this is just a total taste thing. And so I even hesitate to share it. Some of the earlier poetic parts of the book just weren't for me. That's not because they weren't excellent. That's just more of a taste thing right now, that some poetic parts, but I could see reading that with Mal's perspective of this kind of like annoying and hilarious narrator. his poetic, uh, yeah, his poetic elements could be even more interesting if read that way. Yeah, now I feel kind of stupid because there's this kind of like ironic distance with which you could read this narrator from, and I couldn't do that. I didn't even think to do that. And, several of you had that experience of reading this narrator. It sounds like you had a really good time and a fun time. And I'm like, fuck, man, I missed out on that. But if everyone's down, I think we should move to my favorite part of the book. When it came most alive um, and interesting, and really soared into heights that made Macabea come alive outside of this inner monologue of Rodrigo, the narrator, but into a real flesh and blood person on the page, and render her like one of the best characters I've read. And that is when Olympico comes in to the book. These are some of the funniest passages, some of the most brutal passages, some of the most, I feel like, beyond the kind of exposition that Rodrigo has. These scenes between Olympico and Macabea made me understand Macabea's position in society, in the society that I'm unfamiliar with, Brazil in the 70s, in society, but also in the world, in her own mind, in relation to, this kind of like, well, let me just pick out some passages that I saved that I really liked. Okay, so one of the first times they meet, "Excuse me, missy, but would you care to come for a walk?" "Yes," she replied in confusion and haste, before he could change his mind. "If you don't mind my asking, what's your name?" "Macabea." "Maca what?" "Bea," she was forced to repeat. Gosh, it sounds like the name of a disease, a skin disease. So you get immediately this, there's so much in that passage. "Yes," she replied in confusion and haste. You get this like, she's in such a feeling state at being given any attention at all from Olympico, who is like, his portrait, he's a skinny and not a particularly attractive person, but any attention at all, and she has no control, or not control, but her feeling state is so is such that she's just like, yes, he's giving her this attention, he's asking her to go on a walk, and then immediately, just at her saying her name, he is just destroying her, by calling, it sounds like the name of a disease, a skin disease. This dynamic feels so real and so true. This giving of attention, any attention at all, to someone who no one has seen, no one chooses to see. The one person that chooses to see her, even if he sees her in violent and, more or less, I wouldn't say evil, but pretty mean way, it doesn't matter. The attention is something that she's never experienced before. So this is like the kind of hilarious and just like gut-wrenching elements that made the Olympico and Macabea dynamic like some of the best I've ever read. Oh yeah, this is really cool, and I feel like I get to know Macabea's personality so much more. Um, Here's just a little example of her like non sequiturs and spontaneous ways. She has this artful and creative way of interacting and seeing with the world, interacting with the world and its contents. And it's actually, you know, although she's described as being unintelligent and, you know, having nothing, it strikes me as a pretty intelligent and responsive way to look at culture and reality, um, without having access to anything, any resources at all. I'm like, well, Maccabea is actually an exceptional mind. I think that's kind of, that's not a new take or insight. I think that's kind of obvious. But anyway, here's another section that I really liked, that just kind of showcases her mind. Neither of them knew much about walking out together. They walked under the heavy rain and lingered in front of an ironmonger's that boasted a wide selection of metal tubes, containers, nuts, and bolts. Maccabea, afraid that the silence between them might be a warning of imminent separation, remarked to her newly found boyfriend, "I love nuts and bolts. What about you?" That's perfect. There's so much in that page, or in that passage. Um, Afraid, and I forgot that it was even this rich. Maccabea, afraid that the silence between them might be a warning of imminent separation. So there's no foundation, there's no trust, there's nothing to their relationship at all. So much so that any passing image that Maccabea can relay at all, you know, she feels compelled to do so, for the sake of them staying together in any way. And Olympico is my favorite character potentially of all time. Olympico de Jesus Moreira Chavez. He lied because his real surname was simply Jesus, a clear indication that he was illegitimate. The youth had been brought up by his stepfather, who had taught him how to ingratiate himself with people in order to get his own way and how to pick up girls. More Olympico content. Oh, this one's crushing. This one's crushing. I should mention that Maccabea had never received a letter in her life, and any telephone calls in the office were always for the boss or for Gloria. Maccabea once asked Olympico if he wouldn't care to telephone her at the office. He made a crushing reply. Who wants to listen to you talking nonsense on the telephone? It's just, you know, he's there, he's present, he's giving her attention, and it's primarily this crushing kind of attention, you know. But Maccabea's got this like this inner resilience that borders on like superhuman, you know. No, there is no, whether it be hunger, destitution, abuse, dejection, invisibility, you know, not being allowed to take up any space, not having any security, not having the chance at really being, you know, considered or seen a human being. She has this inner resilience and spiritual power that is just like, I mean, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, Maccabea is an amazing character. Is an amazing character. Um, one more part that I really liked about that I really liked with, oh yeah, okay, so here was one thing that I loved about Maccabea and Olympico is their their conversations, some of the best writing I've ever read. This in-scene relationship. Uh, you know, this is like some of the best parts of fiction, and it's done here. Um, Probably the best I've ever read it. I love to hear the pings as the minutes pass. Tick tack, tick tack, tick tack. Radio clock says that it broadcasts the correct time, culture, and commercials. What does culture mean? Culture is culture, he replied grudgingly. Why don't you get off my back? There are so many things I don't understand. What does income per head mean? That's easy. It has something to do with medicine. I just love their, Macabea is given nothing in a way of understanding the world. Olympico has nothing, but believes he is destined for greatness. He has this machismo and bravado and like kind of this like idiot sense of like cunning. And their conversations, if at all about anything sort of worldly or philosophical, are just hilarious. The last one I'll read is a very short clip. Macabea spoke. I shall miss myself. This is just a total non sequitur. I think they're at the zoo, maybe, or something like that. Macabea spoke. I shall miss myself so much when I die. Rubbish. When you're dead, and that's that. That's not what my aunt told me. Damn your aunt. I just love their interactions. I love what they can do together. So, Jim Bingo, yeah, Olympico gave a lot of context for her interactions with other people rather than heady backstory. Was her saying her name to Olympico the first time we learned her name, or am I mistaken? I don't remember. Maybe she definitely is like, I get exactly what you're saying. Like, the heady backstory and the like, right. Yeah. The narrator's like, difficulty with rendering this character only gave that, once we saw Macabea with and in concert with other people in the world, that's when she became brilliant to me. Livia, he bluntly offends her, she ignores her, doesn't understand it, and he loves how he can feel superior to her. Yeah, right. It's like his domain of power is so small that he finds someone that he doesn't even really feel anything towards at all, and they don't really have any sort of relationship. They don't have, there's that crushing scene where the only intimacy he has, right, he lifts her up that one time and she feels like she's flying, and then he drops her and her face falls in the mud, and she's bleeding, and she is like apologizing for herself so that he doesn't feel bad for being too weak to hold her up, right? It's just crushing over and over again. And you're right, like his power, he is this like failed, I don't know about that. He's like masculinity, this like fetishized masculinity that he has no way of exerting onto the world. So he just finds someone he sees as totally helpless that he can like dominate. But when he comes in contact with Macabea's like actual like inner power and resilience in her way of looking at the world, he can't, there's nothing to do. He can't deal with it. So they don't have any intimacy, and they just have this hilarious, crushing relationship. Nixie, I found Olympico infuriating, but I believe the book wouldn't be able to convey its point if it wasn't for him. Yeah, he is a pretty. I think I was more like, he's so funny. But that's how it's funny, Nixie, because that's how I viewed the narrator. I was like, fuck this narrator, fuck Rodrigo. He sucks. His whole the issues that he experiences are uninteresting. They're not giving anything to me. Um, and other people read Rodrigo, the narrator, as um, necessary and vital. So I had maybe my experience of reading Olympico um, was maybe like how Mal and Jim Bingo were reading the narrator. I think that's probably the way this book is asking to be read. And I didn't really get that until 50 some pages through. TJ, she cannot help but be exactly who she is. Yeah, I mean, that's it. She has this power. A lot of people don't have that power. She does. She sees the world, in this private, brilliant way, in this artful way. Nixie, Macabea has a lot of autistic traits, although that's a very modern view, I guess. Yeah, I think you can read a lot of traits into a lot of characters. But I agree. I think she has a lot of very unique ways of thinking. And it's part of the why this book. I think people relate to this book as I can't remember what one of its labels are, but philosophical fiction or something like that, is because you can have these very unique insights on the world through the narrator sometimes, or through Macabea quite often. And what else do I want to say? The ending, I will say, was, yeah, it felt necessary to me. It felt how did the ending feel? Let me drink a cup of tea and take a short break. And if any of y'all want to talk about, so we've basically charted the first 3/4 of the book. We've charted my difficulties with Rodrigo, the narrator, and the immense preamble and the apprehension to storytelling. Hold on, my pot's gonna boil. It may be a little bit too loud. 1 second. All right, we're back, and I think Asa had an interesting comment. I wonder if the Portuguese helps convey more clearly the comic slash ironic nature of the narrator. And then he asked Livia if they're a Portuguese speaker reader. Um, that's probably what am I trying to say? I think that's a good take, a good idea, and that like me not really being able to know how to read or deal with um, the narrator for the first 50 or so pages and like taking him pretty literally. Uh, yeah, maybe it's a translation issue. I hope it makes me seem less dull or like stupid. I essentially like read him not in the wrong way, but in like a very literal way, and it's now pretty obvious to me that that was not um, the most uh, intelligent way to take him, or the most like fulfilling way to read him. Um, yeah, okay. So Livia says that yes, I'm from Brazil, and the translating is something I worry because it feels like so much to me because she wrote that way, and I guess things are always lost in translation. Yeah, I mean, I didn't get the sense at all, um, that Rodrigo was supposed to be this kind of like pantomime. And if I did, I think I would have like enjoyed him and been like, oh, I get what Lispector is doing. And now I'm a little bit more caffeinated, but I'm like delighted that that's what she was doing, because it is like, what a great thing to like um, render into like this extreme irony and belabor um, and uh, yeah, just like kind of make into a joke is this kind of philosophical difficulty that Rodrigo is having. I also feel like it's her um, kind of like taking a stab at the like male uh, existentialist writers who were so prominent in the 70s, and she's like, come on already with the fucking philosophical difficulties with storytelling. I don't think that she's like saying that that isn't true, because it all is true, but like the pantomime she makes of Rodrigo, um, seen through that ironic and like stuffy and overindulgent way, is like actually really hilarious and poignant and brilliant. And it makes me like the book even more. And I actually think I'll read this book again now, and read him in that way, because I think the heights of the book will soar even higher for me, and the difficulty I had with Rodrigo um, will be uh, will be a lot less. I think I'll be able to interpret him like Mal, like Livia, and like, I can't remember who else had that reading too, but Jambingo had that reading too. Um, I think that will help me a lot with this book, and make it a book that I like and respect way more. Just plainly, like I read and interpreted it in um, there's no right or wrong way, but I read it pretty wrong. I read it pretty wrong. Um, Livia says, and because I see the people she based them on, I can see, and I've carved this book a lot in my understanding of them. Um, Mal, I think also interesting to compare Rodrigo to Olympico. Yes, 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 yes. Of course, that's fantastic. I mean, the way I read Olympico is the way you can read Rodrigo. and in a way that's messing with like narrative authority, and trust that you put in a narrator, um, or in an author. I kind of read, maybe on first go, as like Rodrigo as this odd kind of proxy that Lispector had. Um, uh, yeah, but like if there's no way of reading Olympica Olympico with any sort of like um, seriousness, and I think that's the same way that Rodrigo's being asked to be read. You can't read him seriously in any way, so then you take his sort of like philosophical overconfidence a lot, with a much bigger grain of salt, and then it becomes really funny. Mal, although Rodrigo grapples more with a form of domination over Macabea than Olympico does, where he recognizes that storytelling is his mechanism of control over her. I don't know. I have to read back to confirm that idea. I think it's a good idea. I think it's this. This is a space to kind of throw things out there against the wall and see if they stick. And it's nice to just let them rip. Yeah, I guess I wonder if Asa, what Asa's experience was. Asa, he reached out with a comment about the ironic nature of the narrator. I wonder if Asa, if how your experience of this book was, of the narrator, of Olympico, and kind of when Macabea is rendered more in fiction, in a story, from like page 50 on. And then let's dive into the ending pretty quickly, because I don't think I don't have that much to say about the ending. I feel like, in a way, like not called out, but I just feel like, oh shit, my whole interpretation and reading of this book is kind of mute at this point, because I didn't understand a perspective of Rodrigo and the narrator that now seems like obvious, which is fine. You go in and you feel that and you read a book in that way, and then this is why we have book club, is to get different perspectives. But anyway, oh yeah, the ending. As a spoiler, I don't know if anyone's watching this an hour plus in and hasn't read the book. I don't even think I need to say spoiler, but if you want to read it now and you haven't, maybe tune out. It doesn't matter. There's no spoilers. This is not a plotted book really at all. But Macabea, she sees the clairvoyant, who mixes up her future with the other girl's future that was in the lobby. She told that girl that she was going to be hit by a car, and then Macabea's actually hit by the car. It's like a yellow Mercedes. There's this promise of, what was it, Hans, this like Norwegian or Nordic, foreign person who's going to save her from her plight, from her life. It was also this clairvoyant for the first time. I think this is when this happens for the first time, like Macabea sees herself and understands herself from an outside perspective for the first time ever. And then she realizes that she's been in despair, and that she is in destitution. She realizes where she is in the world and society for the first time. I'm pretty sure this happens at the fortune teller. And then she just gets, wiped out by this car, hit by this car. and it ends, I guess, in the only appropriate way. I mean, she's seen by others for the first time when she's on the street. They don't do anything to help her, but she's seen, she's given attention for the first time, which feels like something, and she dies. And she dies, that's that, book's over. It's not that simple, but yeah, I think there's no, you felt the kind of narrators, this inevitability and this inescapable feeling of inevitability, that this is like always going to be the way it turns out for Macabea, or someone like Macabea, like from anonymity back to anonymity. And it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like the kind of heart-wrenching, I don't even know if heart-wrenching is, it's just like the crushing reality of this character, of this person, of this like, yeah, I'm struggling to kind of like articulate how the inevitability of the ending was necessary, and like there wouldn't have been any other way to tell the story. Livia says, I recommend seeing her interview from TV Cultura. She made it when she had finished this book, and you see a bit of how she was when writing it, and it was her last work, for she died soon after. Asa, per your question, I was also curious, vexed by the teasing of the story starting, the narrative hand-wringing. I didn't arrive at conclusions, but did make me think about what we do as writers in regards to expectation setting. What is the handshake we are giving our reader? What is the promise? Nixie just commented, I always go into books with absolutely no context or background whatsoever, and I feel like I'm missing so many important points now. We'll definitely be reading it like 3 more times. Nixie, I also try to do the same thing, which is somewhat impossible, because you're always going to take into it your, like, I mean, there's a social way of reading, which is like you always bring into it your socio-political context, where you're at in the world, your experiences and your positioning in the world will always be read into a book. That's inevitable. That's a given. And you're going to bring some, like, I'll read a Lispector novel different than I read a novel from an independent press that was published in 2024 that comes from a writer who I don't know, who I don't necessarily trust, who isn't lauded and respected, right? So there is a positioning that I have for Lispector, because she is a goated writer, rather than, content could be exactly the same, but I probably would have given up on the writer that I didn't know was great. I probably would have given up on that book before I gave up on Lispector, which I didn't. I read it and I got to the parts that really excelled for me. But I do like Nixie. I like that approach, and I try to take that same approach as much as possible into every book that I read. I don't want to read any introductions. I don't want anyone to tell me about how I should think of the book. I don't want to position it in any way. And if I read it in a way that is ill-informed, so be it. I want to have an experience with something, and then, as I'm interacting with the book and as I'm learning more, hopefully I can get more context as I go, and then, like you said, like, come back to it. If I totally miss a reading that's obviously there, hopefully I can come back to it, and have a different experience with a book. But I like to stay as uninformed about something as I can. Um, Mal says, I also think there's something interesting about the simple pleasures she has: soft drinks, Coca-Cola, movies. And Hans has the prophesized white savior, some sort of underlining theme of colonialism. Yeah, and and consuming those objects of comfort, and pleasure, very rarely, but they're very simple. And yeah, there's something 100% to that. Uh, Hot dogs, yeah. Hot dogs and Coca-Cola. I think there's something about Coca-Cola, um, movies, that sort of thing. Livia, I feel the no understanding her. It's something I find with every work, and reading again and diving deeper than the last time. She's just so hard to grasp. Yeah, I can totally see how that would be. Uh, uh, that would be the case reading Lispector, and it just makes me, having y'all's perspective now on this book and the different reading, makes me understand why Lispector is so highly regarded. Like, she's doing things that are um, just levels ahead and beyond what I was even prepared. I feel like I'm a pretty observant, astute, patient, and good reader, and she was 10 steps beyond me, um, beyond what I could even get out of the story. So yeah, I'm happy to read more Lispector and dive into her work more. Mal says, yes, Western pleasures as escape from poverty in the global South. Not escape, but distraction, maybe. Yeah. Um, yeah, and back to Asa's comment. I was also curious and vexed by this teasing of the story starting, the narrative hand-wringing. I didn't arrive at conclusions, but it did make me think about what we do as writers in regards to expectation setting. What is the handshake we are giving our reader? What is the promise? I think that's a good way um, to kind of start to wrap this up. Um, what is the promise? Um, what is the handshake that Lispector is setting up for us? And how can that impact future readings of this book? And then last comment, Livia says, the taste of something Western is like a way to fakely feel that she belonged to them and escape from her own culture and roots. Yeah, I mean, just another way that Maccabea is totally, has this crushing uh, experience. Anyway, I think that is about it. If anyone has any other comments that feel compelled, that they would feel sad that they didn't contribute before we ended, please put them in the chat before we end. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and for honestly helping me along in my reading of this book and my understanding of it. I definitely feel like big time I learned how to read this book from y'all. I feel like I have a different understanding of what was going on in the book from this book club, and I really appreciate that. There's a lot of really good readers and thinkers who join in this very small and hard to track down book club. It's really fun. And yeah, I appreciate it. I have some ideas about the next book. And I've got 2 different ideas, but I will maybe. I don't have to hold off. I definitely want to read one of. Either want to read one of. Oh shoot, what's his name? W.G. Sebald's books. Any of his books other than on the natural history of destruction, which I just don't want to read that one again. But Austerlitz, Rings of Saturn, Immigrants, or there's one other, Vertigo. I'd be interested in any one of those books. I think he's got a really interesting way of talking. I mean, this theme is running through all of our books. Is this like way of approaching reality, truth, storytelling, narrative, in a way that I misunderstood Rodrigo in this book, grappling with it, and in a way that I kind of champion like Sebald approaching, where he's like taking from reality, writing these like essay fictions, using photographs and telling stories in that way. He's got a very interesting way of approaching that problem. And I think that any one of those books would be interesting to read. Or there is a series, an anthology of essays that John D'Agata put together on the lost origins of the essay. And I think some of the essays in there, I just ordered the book, and it should be coming in the next couple days. I think some of the essays in there are pretty long and also in the public domain, so we could like PDF them and get them for free. So if any one of those like really strikes me and sticks out as like fitting in this book club, and like we would get a lot out of it, I will maybe pick one of those. And if not, we'll read a Sebald book that people can like vote for. So that's what's next for next month, either an essay in the public domain that's very interesting that we can unpack together, or a Sebald book. And I'll read the last comments from everyone. Asa says, thank you, great stuff. Livia says, I would just like to recommend the movie they made based on the book. It goes by the same name and is on YouTube with subtitles. It captured it well and is just a good laugh, I think. Okay, cool. I would definitely check that out. I had no idea they made a movie. And if they could actually, if they could recreate some of the like comedic elements with Olympico, Macabea, and even the narrator, I would be really interested to watch that. Mal says, thank you so much for hosting these. Nixie says, I also feel like Hit and Run is in a way a casual, unspecial way to die, but her being so simple, innocent, and pitiful makes her death so much more violent. I was already so emotionally attached to her. Yeah, great point. Nixie says, again, sorry for being so late with my comments today. LOL, but ended up on babysitting duty. It's all good. Great insights. Thank you, Mal, for pointing out an entirely different way to read the narrator. I really appreciate your perspective. Nixie, also really excellent comments. Livia, especially very, very helpful, insightful perspective. Asa, appreciate it as a writer, thinking about the authorial intention. TJ was in here for a while. Jambingo was very helpful and had a similar perspective to Mal and how to read the narrator that was helpful. And who else? Sophie Reeds was here for a moment, so thank you, Sophie. And I think that's it. Thanks again, everyone. We'll pick another book or essay in the next few days to read for next month or for this month, and I will see you soon. Thanks, everybody.